Uh, so just a broad overview of The Merchant's Tale. It's clearly a May-December romance. It's clearly part of the marriage group debate. It wouldn't normally be if it was just a man and a woman, because The Miller's Tale is about a May-December romance and tensions between a man and a woman, but it's not necessarily a central part of the marriage group debate. Um, but bringing in the Greco-Roman gods as symbols of maleness and femaleness and the conflicts between males and females in a marriage, and how that male, Pluto, in some ways resembles January, being an aristocrat, a more upper class person with all the power, who has a beautiful young woman kind of as a slave. In this case, the aristocracy goes higher than human. Pluto is a god. Proserpina is a human who was literally abducted by the god. And by analogy, we have the patriarchy, the white male sort of aristocrat with all the power, being January. It's sort of a pun on May-December romance, that he's actually older than December, is January. Deeper into the winter, I guess. Sadly, he's so old, he's 60 years old, which hurts me right now. It kind of hurts personally a little bit, because that's kind of my season. But anyway, so May-December romance, it's a marriage group debate. Of course, Proserpina is sort of looking out for May. When we think about the May-December romance and compare it or contrast it to the Miller's Tale, we actually find some differences. May is low class. She's beautiful, just like Alisoun in that story. But the difference is Alisoun is much more passive aggressive rather than aggressive. So she will use her feminine charms to permit men to make all of the sort of planning. So in the Miller's Tale, it is Nicolas who does all the planning, and Alisoun seems to be passive and goes along with it. It turns out we know she's not passive, because it's not a passive act to stick your naked, somewhat moist buttocks and genitalia in the face of a priest. So we know that she is not some wilting little flower. But nonetheless, insofar as the active role in planning the adulterous act, she's very passive. Here, May is the active agent of the planning, and Damien is more passive. Okay, so the only gross out element, if we're thinking about this in terms of a fabliau, which it's classified as by most critics, the only gross out moment is when she gets her first love note from Damien. She tears it up and throws it in the toilet. Doesn't seem to be that gross. Now, it's not something they would ever mention in an actual courtly romance, which this tale weirdly has some elements of courtly romance to it. We'll discuss that in our discussion time. And we have some proto-Freudian symbols. I think I mentioned one day the sort of silly thesis that Chaucer invented Freud. Did I do that in this class? Well, here's a little bit more of Freudian imagery. January and May go into a private garden. Now, in England, a garden is 4 high walls, a gate, and then you go into a secluded area. In America, a garden is 1 acre of rows of peas and beans and corn, but by garden, we would say more like a indoor park, an inner park. So almost everyone in England has a home, has a garden, and it's an area where you go and you sit. There's a park bench or something like that. There's rose bushes, there's little paths, there's little rock garden areas. And it says that this is the greatest garden in the world that January has built. And of course, it is a kind of earthly paradise. It's a kind of Adam and Eve type sexual paradise. So they go in there. Gardens are a big thing in the Middle Ages. And they do represent a kind of earthy sexuality. I should probably tell you a little bit about one of the most famous books of the Middle Ages. You might want to write this down. It's called Romance of the Rose. And it was started by a guy named Jean de Meun. And it wasn't very long, but it was unfinished. And then another guy came along named Guillaume de Lorry and finished it and made it about 20 times bigger. And the premise is that there's this knight walking along a high wall and looks up, and over the top of the wall, he sees this beautiful rose. And this rose is so beautiful and hypnotic and overpowering and enchanting that he is smitten with this overpowering urge. He must have that rose. He must pluck that rose. And of course, the rose is, in the Middle Ages, a very feminine image. It smells beautiful. It's beautiful, and the rose petals itself suggest certain feminine anatomical aspects, keeping this a family movie. And so when he wants to pluck the rose, it's obviously a carnal desire to pluck a woman, if you know what I'm trying to say. So, and also in the Renaissance, the rose is a symbol of sexuality. So he decides he wants to get that rose. So he goes up to the wall. He can't climb the wall. He can't tunnel under the wall. He walks along the wall. He can't walk around the wall. And it represents courtly love. It represents the courtly lover looking up high to the rose, to the lady high up, wanting to pluck her, if you will. And yet she's so high above me. She's so lovely. And so it was a very influential work. Well, along the lines of that sort of garden, here he is, and he and his wife go in there. They strip naked. They run around. They have sex. They do all kinds of things. And that garden represents that kind of earthy intimacy. So, of course, Pluto and Proserpina love to go there. And so, but there's only one key with which January can wield, and the key is hanging on his belt, hanging on the front of his belt, and he can take his key and he can insert it into May's lock and open up her gate and enter her garden, right? And so naturally, she doesn't want him to have that key. So she gets that key from him, and she empowers Damien to make a key. So Damien now has the key to her garden. And so I have made a little kind of, well, you kind of get the idea here. And opening up her garden into her garden is what I'm trying to say. So Damien is there, and as they come in, interestingly, the old man is blind, is talking about wanting her never to commit adultery on him, to make him a cuckold. And she says, well, I would never, if ever I do that, put me in a sack and throw me in the river and I'll drown. And the whole time she's pointing Damien to go up this tree. So again, even the choice of the tree. It's a pear tree. It's ripe with pears. He climbs the tree, and she says something of interest. She says, there's Damien going up the tree. And you got to imagine that Damien goes up and he has taken off his pants, and he's happy to see her, I guess you'd say. And so when she looks up at the limb he's standing on, what she's seeing is a particular aspect of his anatomy, one that she's happy to see because he's glad to see her, right? And so she says to her husband, a woman in my condition just has to have a pair. I've got to have a pair. And she's implying that she's pregnant, and a lot of times women who are pregnant do seem to have interesting pangs for certain tastes. My wife wanted nothing but to eat beef, just beef. She became a velociraptor. My dad bought her a side of beef with each one of my daughters as she was pregnant, and she would eat the whole thing. I couldn't even touch the beef. I had to eat peanut butter because she had to have it all. And that's why I've gotten fat from eating all that peanut butter, and I've suffered so deeply. But anyway, so sometimes ladies have these. Haley, did you actually have any hunger pangs or particular things you needed?
Yeah, hot wings.
Okay, so this is a thing, and she's saying, in my pregnant state, I have to have a pair. She's not pregnant, and her state is not pregnancy, it's lust. And the pear that she's looking at is not a fruit pear, but a, well, you know, I think you can get the idea. She wants this pear. So what she does is we have this horrible moment where she's literally using her husband as a pathetic footstool to climb on his back because she can't climb the lower limbs, to climb up to get connected with Damien. And so you got to imagine they're standing on two separate limbs. They're leaning into each other. They're naked. And we have an actual sort of, really the most graphic moment of the Canterbury Tales. The merchant says, ladies, I beg you not to be angry with me, you elegant ladies. I can't say fancy things. I'm a common low-class guy. So all I can say is immediately this Damon whipped up her dress and thrust himself deep in her. And in he thrust. So that moment is really the most graphic sexual moment of all the Canterbury Tales. And yet it's not in a traditional fableau. We might expect that of the cook or the reeve, the miller, because they told dirty, filthy stories. This is almost a courtly romance in its setting, with the gods and the garden and courtly love working and things like that. So the merchant says he's a dirty, low-class, nobody loser, but he tells a tale that is surprisingly upper class, weirdly, except for the moments like this. So she is experiencing, certain joys in the tree there. And you've got to imagine that in their dance, that the tree is being shaken. Pears are falling down. Blossoms are falling. And the old man is being pelted. And he's hearing noises in the tree. And of course, this is the moment that Pluto uses his magic powers to bring January's eyesight back. And you've got to imagine that he looks up, and when he looks up, he doesn't just see vague images of a man and a woman sort of in the bushes and the branches. He sees, first thing, looking straight up, the mechanics of the situation. I mean, you can clearly see the ins and outs of things, if you will, right? And so you've got to imagine that he's like, wait, what, huh? And he's hurt. And then he's furious. So Haley likes this video, I can tell. Rosie's smiling a little bit. But anyway, so he says, you're a slut. I'm watching this. And Proserpina gives her a couple of responses because she's a common woman. She's not, going to be able to think articulately on her feet, make elegant arguments. And she makes two arguments. One, I'm up in a tree wrestling with a man because the doctor prescribed this because, and I guess in modern terms we'd say it like this, there was a chance that your blindness was psychosomatic and not actual medical problem. And if I were somewhere you couldn't get to me, if I were in a tree above you and I was wrestling with a man, you would panic, and in your desire to want to defend me, it might psychosomatically bring back your eyesight so you could defend me. So that's her argument. But he says, I don't buy any of that crap because I could see the ins and outs. I could literally see it, what you were doing. And again, she's given an insight, and she says, oh, well, of course, when you first wake up in the morning, your eyes are all hazy from sleep, and everything's blurry, and you're not seeing things that are there, and you're seeing things that aren't there. Well, you've been blind all this time, so of course the first time that you see, your mind is going to struggle seeing things rightly. So you hallucinated what you thought you saw. It didn't happen. Even though Damien is probably still buck naked or just pulling up his pants while they're talking. And he buys this crap. And she says, as a kind of an added twist, your eyesight is probably going to be tricky for several more days. And over the next several days, you may see other things that aren't there. So apparently she liked the pears, right? So she may make love with Damien over the next couple of days. And as her husband sees this, she says, no, I'm sorry, you're still hallucinating. And they live happily ever after. The moral of the tale, of course, is you might as well be blind as to be an idiot. Both ways you're blind. So there is a sense in which January was always blind, and even his wise counselor Justinius couldn't help him see because he was intellectually blind. He was stupid. And then he was physically blind, which was merely an outer manifestation of his inner stupidity, his folly. And so that's the moral of the story. So my question for us to discuss is, what is going on with this tableau? Because it does seem to contain a lot of things that wouldn't be in a traditional tableau, or from the traditional tableau point of view, because a tableau is written for common people to have a good filthy laugh, and therefore it will often put more upper class people into a bad light, or their values into a bad light. You remember how The Miller's Tale made fun of courtly love, can make fun of chivalry, can make fun of morality, which to the lower class person is all pretension. So what are some things in this tale that suggest that it doesn't quite fit the traditional fableau?
The use of the gods in the garden.
The use of the gods. I know of no other fableau in the Middle Ages that has gods in it. But the Knight's Tale has gods. You know, upper class things has gods. So that's weird. Why would lower class people be interested in Greco-Roman gods and their philosophy of marriage? What else?
Could it be that they lived happily ever after?
Yeah, that's another thing is that, well, two things there. One, they live happily ever after. Now, we don't know that in the Miller's Tale that John's marriage was wrecked. He doesn't seem to really know that Allison was having an affair on him. He's probably heard a little bit that she lied to the crowd and said that he's insane. But as far as we know, they go back together. There's no need to think otherwise. He doesn't know about the affair with, Nicholas, or the attempted affair with Absalom. But it isn't a happy ever after thing. Here, the May-December romance is made further ridiculous by the idiocy of the guy getting duped, that he not only doesn't know better, but he seems to think it's great, right? So that is weird. And then the sort of happily ever after element with Damien and May. I mean, we don't know that they're going to have an affair from now on, but there's nothing to keep them from doing it, especially if January sees it and she can talk him into thinking that he's just still deluded in his eyesight. But the fact is that courtly love works here. It really is courtly love. He really is sick for love with her. He's loved her for a long time. He couldn't tell her. He's sick for love. He gives her love notes. They have this elaborate courtship through passing of love notes. So part of courtly love is that sense that the fruition of love is strained and postponed. And that's certainly true here. They really do seem to be truly in love with each other, like they should have been together to start with. We certainly didn't feel that. Most readers don't. With Allison and Nicholas, they just wanted a quickie, They didn't seem to care much for each other. They just liked each other's bodies. But here they really do seem to be in love. That's weird. Why would common people like that the two winners of the story are in courtly love with one another, and one's a squire? So that's weird. What else are things that are weird?
There's no gross out elements.
No gross out elements, unless you get a microscope and see that the note was thrown in the crapper. That's not a gross out element. It just sort of slightly is disqualified from being in a courtly romance, right? But there's no gross out elements. What else? Is there any violence? Any cartoon violence? No. Now, of the three things that often we find in courtly romance, there's only one, and that's dirty, filthy sex. And it is, in just those few lines I showed you, the most graphic moment, a really short graphic moment of filthy, dirty sex. So it certainly qualifies for that, and the whole comedy bit about making love in the pear tree is certainly worthy of fableau, but there's the other parts aren't there. What else? Okay, so that's a good analysis. Now, the question, now that's the analysis. Usually we take that analysis and we try to suggest a thesis. So the question is, why are those elements in there? What is the merchant's tale about? What is the merchant doing? Who is his audience? What is he trying to do? And you could write a paper on this, and students have written a paper on what they think is going on with the genre in the tale. So what might be some ideas you just come up with off the top of your head? What is going on in this story?
Is he basically trying to say that there's no difference between upper class and lower class? They're all idiots the same way?
Okay, he could be trying a mixture of genres. That is to say, let me think of an example. Do you know this new Star Wars TV series, The Mandalorian? Anybody know that show? That is clearly taking two radically different genres and melding them. What are the two genres? Do you know The Mandalorian?
Yeah. Is one of them sci-fi?
Sci-fi.
Like-
So the obvious thing, it's Star Wars, it's sci-fi. But it's actually only about 45% sci-fi and 55% another genre. What? Boy, you kids are young. You ever heard of a Western? Did you know that every episode of Mandalorian is taken from a classic Western? They take the exact plot and they just have the Mandalorian do it instead of John Wayne, or, right? So it is straight up a Western. But they just, instead of a horse, they have a spaceship. And so it's a straight up mix of a Western. Now, sometimes that works well, as it does really well with Mandalorian, or as it does in an old TV series called Firefly. Have you ever heard of Firefly?
One of the best shows ever.
Works great there, but I'm watching, I just watched two Riff Tracks movies, if you know what Riff Tracks is. In the 80s, they did two really bad movies called Oblivion. And it is a really crappy Western sci-fi. Does that make sense? So maybe this is trying to mix Fableau and courtly romance, or at least Fableau and Breton Lay. Remember, Breton Lay is a middle-class courtly romance. So that's one idea that Michael suggested. Other ideas?
The merchant trying to elevate his status in a way to make it seem like he's more knightly than he is.
Ooh, I like that one. I'd never thought of that one. So we know that the merchant is in debt. And he's really the only Canterbury Pilgrim we know of that's struggling financially. But he dresses to the nines. And so he's trying to be more than he really is. So maybe he's a low-class guy, which he admits several times, but maybe he's just trying to pump his Fableau with a little more upper-class steroids. But then, of course, it wouldn't necessarily be trying to please the lower classes. It would be trying to do something else. But that's a great idea. Was that Haley?
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Maybe that's something that matches the personality of the teller with the theory of the genre. So that's really smart. Other ideas? Yeah, Carson. I think you're muted because I see your mouth moving, but I don't hear you. Now you're muted. For some reason, you're having technical problems and we can't hear you. At least I can't. Can anyone hear her?
No, at all?
I think I can now.
Okay.
Yeah, now you're back.
Okay. I was gonna say, I forget the placement of this tale. I'll have to look at the book again. But was it? It could be maybe Chaucer trying to revert back from all the really, really dirty fabuloos, like how he was starting to, like how the tale cut off, because like we were saying, possibly he was wanting to kind of stray away from those tales again, and maybe this one was kind of the in between of trying to go from the really dirty tales to going back to more of like a more like coherent storytelling, I guess. Not coherent, but what I'm trying to say.
Yes. I love that idea. This probably is in the first third of the Canterbury Tales. And so it would have come immediately preceding this is the Clerk's Tale. And the reason that's important is in the Clerk's Tale, which we'll read later. It's a really good tale. It is about this upper class guy who goes shopping among the peasant girls, the low class girls, to find one that is the most beautiful and the most moral. And he finds one, and she really is beautiful and moral. Right after that is this tale of a merchant who hates marriage. He's only been married 2 months, but he hates it. And he tells a parody of the Clerk's Tale about an aristocratic guy who goes shopping among the low-class peasant girls for a beautiful and moral girl. She's beautiful, turns out not as moral, perhaps, as Griselda, right? And he's emphasizing that marriages and women aren't as ideal as the clerk was saying, right? So there's a little snark there, a little satire. Good. So that may be at play here. Other ideas? Great speculation. Well, I invite you, if you want to do your paper on that, to explore, what's going on there. That'd be awesome. So let's talk about The Wife of Bath's Tale. You've all read it, yeah? So I'm just going to ask the question, because I like this class as a Socratic method rather than a lecture class. I'm just going to ask the question, what is the role of women in this story? Particularly the wife of Bath. Now, the backstory is the first generation feminists saw her as a great pioneering feminist because she actually makes some great feminist arguments. For example, in the Book of Wicked Wives that her fifth husband is reading to her, she says, what if men had written those stories? In other words, this is talking about women from a merely masculine point of view, and therefore it's skewed. Well, that is an argument that feminists make to this day, to this minute. And so she comes up with some great feminist arguments. She's clearly a woman that isn't going to take crap off of anyone, especially the male clerical patriarchy, right? She does what she wants. She says what she wants. She sleeps with who she wants to. She rides a horse like a man. She doesn't ride side saddles. She wears not only boots, but spurs on her boots. If anyone says anything to her, she tears them a new one. She literally preaches. She preaches that sermon on sex. And two different clergymen say, hey, you were preaching. That's not right that you were preaching. And she knows that's not right. It's not right because she's a woman. It's not right because she's not of the priestly class. And low-class people were not supposed to read. It was against the law for most of the Middle Ages for low-class people to read. They couldn't read. She cites the Bible several times, so she's knowledgeable, presumably through her fifth husband, Jankin, who was a university student who read books to her. She has this powerful feminist thesis that women want power. That thesis wends itself through the prologue and through the tale. And so, much like a sermon, she starts out with a sermon illustration, which is her life, and then she tells a story or that is an illustration of her thesis, right? We're going to see that same pattern when we come to the Pardoner's Tale, because the Pardoner does the same thing. He introduces a thesis, and then he tells a story that perfectly reflects that thesis. Here, the thesis is women want power in the marriage. Clearly, this is a Breton lay. Did I talk about what a Breton lay was last time? How it's distinct from a courtly romance?
I don't think so.
I haven't?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, well, so we should define a Breton lay. A Breton lay is a middle-class courtly romance. Now, we've read a courtly romance in The Knight's Tale. So a Breton lay is kind of like, I like all the elements of a courtly romance, but I don't like it being so upper class, right? So let me give you an example, an application from movies. How many of you have ever heard of a guy named Sean Connery? You ever heard of Sean Connery? How many of you ever heard of a movie he did called First Night? You ever heard of First Night? In it, he plays an older King Arthur, and Richard Gere plays Lancelot. And the central question is, who is Guinevere going to go for, right? And it is a very courtly romance, right? I'm trying to think of other movies that really fit. Have you ever heard of an old 80s movie, really good, called Lady Hawk? Michael keeps nodding yes, everyone else no. God bless you, Michael. That is a very, good courtly romance. I suppose to some degree, have you ever heard of the movie Troy? That's a bit of a courtly romance, sort of. So courtly romances have upper class people. They give long, eloquent speeches. There is immense detailed description of little things like the paint on a wall of, Venus's temple. And those are things middle-class people don't want. So middle-class people want the chivalry, that's fine. The courtly love, that's great. The devotion, the religion, the morality, that's great. But I would say that they don't want so much upper class polish. They don't want long speeches, cut the speeches. They don't want long, boring passages of description, cut the description. And concerning courtly love, they'd like it to have a little more sex in it. Not just looking at a flower from the ground high up coming up over the wall. How about pluck the girl? What if you just kiss the girl? What if you just, so for example, there's a King Arthur Breton lay called Sir Launfal. I teach a course on King Arthur sometimes. And this hero, the hero, Sir Launfal, is riding his horse. He sees a tent out in the wilderness, a pavilion, and he rides up and he sees a lady. And the first time he sees her, she is topless. She has dressed to attract. And he walks up and they make love right off the bat. That's a Breton lay. You're not going to see that in a courtly romance. Does that make sense? So kiss the girl, be with the girl. That is more Breton Lay. Another element of Breton Lay is, how about some actual fighting? How about some real, kill a dragon, would you? Or, we want some actual, we don't want to just talk about chivalry and its ideals. Go out and kill something. So they want a little more action adventure. And then another thing they like is more magic, especially more folklore or folk tale or fairy tale elements. So they want more going on. They get bored. So I mentioned to you some of those really upper class movies. Now I'm going to tell you a movie that I consider perfect Breton Lay in modern culture. It's one you probably know. You ever heard of The Princess Bride? Okay, you're smiling. Now, it likes courtly love, true love, as he's rolling down the hill, right? It likes chivalry. I just as soon destroy a stained glass window as you, right? But so it has those high-minded ideals like a courtly romance, but it's for the middle class, right? I mean, there is actual great sword fighting in it. There is farting, exploding swamp rats. There is sort of comedy elements. Good luck storming the castle, right? And so there's not a lot of long courtly speeches or, elaborate descriptions or things. It's, let's get to it. And so we have two stories in a row that we're going to be reading, Wife of Bath and Franklin's Tale, that are Breton Lays, and you can see differences between them. So having said that, in what way now that since I've described a Breton Lay, by the way, it's called a Breton Lay because do you remember that peninsula in extreme northwestern France, that finger sticking out into the ocean that earlier I mentioned that everybody fled down there, the Celts during the time of the Dark Ages when the Angles and Saxons and Jutes were pushing westward, that they sailed down there, they populated Brittany. Did I mention that? Well, those people today are Celts, even today. And in Chaucer's time, or just before Chaucer's time, there were a couple of great writers, both of them women, but there were also some men. But Marie de France is one of them. You might want to write down the name Marie de France was one of them. And they began writing these sort of middle-class courtly romances that were filled with folktale, fairy tale elements. And they became so popular, they came across the English Channel, and the English started adopting them and telling them and reworking them. And that's what Chaucer is doing. So lay is just poem or story. So these are stories from Brittany. That's what a Breton Lay means. So having said that, what are some elements in the Wife of Bath's tale that sort of show us a little bit that it's Breton Lay?
There's magic with the old hag.
Okay. So we have the old hag having magic. Now, what's her backstory? How did he meet her?
Wasn't it because, Carson, were you trying to talk, Carson? Okay. Wasn't it because he saw like a group of like fairies or something in the woods and he thought they would have the...
Exactly. So he sees 24 ladies dancing in a circle in a clearing within a larger forest. Now, in the Middle Ages, that means fairies. And fairies are from the Celtic world. And we see carryovers of fairies in shows like Bewitched or Charmed. So think of women who are more beautiful than human women, who have magical powers. That's a fairy. And so they can be naughty or they can be nice. They can be bad or helpful or they can be good. But they often will dance in a circle in what's called a fairy ring. And in the Middle Ages, you would come across a fairy ring and see this circle in the dirt. And we call them crop circles today. No, so I'm kind of serious about this. There apparently is some kind of a mole that grows on the ground in a circle. And it kind of wears through the grass. And I guess people in the Middle Ages thought that that was where fairies danced. And so they believed in fairies and fairy rings. And so women dancing in a circle in a clearing. When you come out of the forest and you break into the clearing, you have sort of violated their magic zone, and they may get hostile, or, as is often the case, they'll disappear. So he's accidentally broken into a fairy ring, and they leave one ugly old hag behind. Now, we don't know that she's fairy, but why would they leave her behind, right? And then she immediately says, I know the answer to your riddle. So even the riddle that you have to answer to save your life, and you're given a year and a day to do it, is part of folklore, right? We see that exactly in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Have you ever read that story? He's given a year and a day to basically solve the riddle of where the crap is the Green Chapel and who is the Green Knight, and to go there. And it's always a year and a day. Now, a year and a day just means a year from today. So if it's January 1st, it means January 1st next year, right? So it's not a year and a day like January 2nd or something. So that's a folklore element. The fact that when he first sees her, that she says, she doesn't, without even asking what he's doing there, she says, I know the answer to your riddle. So she obviously has magical powers to know that. Later we find out that she can change herself into young and beautiful as opposed to old and ugly. Good. So that folklore element Michael mentioned. What else makes it Breton Lay-ish?
Would it be the beginning whenever the knight rapes that young girl?
Good. How so?
Would that, well, you wouldn't probably find that in A Courtly Love.
No. I don't remember rape ever in any courtly romance story, except in a very, very long, very great book called Malory's La Morte d'Arthur. There's this one villain, a super villain, who goes around raping people. But the hero of the story isn't a rapist, or doesn't start out as a rapist. So that's definitely not courtly romance. It's almost more Fableau. But clearly the hero is interested in a woman for more than courtly love. So that illustrates your point. That's what you were trying to say. Good. What else?
Is it that there's like a moral ending to the story?
Good. Very strong moral ending to the story. You don't really see that in courtly romance. You kind of have to, they assume the reader is elegant and sophisticated enough to reason it out. We don't see an obvious moral in The Knight's Tale, right? We won't see one in The Squire's Tale, which is the only courtly romance that we read. What else? You guys are doing a great job as always. What else?
Would it be the fact that there's King Arthur is a character, or is that just
Yes.
like a side? Okay.
Well, King Arthur can be a character in either courtly romance or Breton Lay. As
Okay.
I said, there are a number of Breton Lays where King Arthur is a character. But what's interesting here is he's almost irrelevant. He immediately acquiesces to Guinevere, and she becomes the central figure, and that's interesting. I don't know if it's Breton Lay, but it's interesting. Good. What else?
Is there kind of a religious aspect to it because she kind of is his savior in a way and
Yes.
changes his heart?
And in fact, this tale is a part of a motif of what we call education of a lover. Do you know the term education of a lover? Sort of. I used to think that it was a German term, Lebensroman, but every time I looked that up I think I learned that as an undergrad. But when I look up Lebensroman, because I think Lebens is lover and Roman would be man or something. But when I look it up on the internet, I can never find the term Lebensroman, so maybe I just hallucinated that. But anyway, the idea of the education of a lover is it's a motif for gigantic amounts of literature in Western civilization and probably others, that someone starts out, usually it's male, and he's young and he's a lover and he doesn't know how to love. And the reason he doesn't know how to love is he thinks that love is about what you get. And he has to have a mentor, usually a female. And that female is often in 80s and 90s movies, the girl next door that wears the baseball cap and has the thick glasses, but we all know is a beautiful fashion model. And that's his buddy, that's his best friend, and she has to train him how to love. She has to take him to love school. Love school, baby, love school, right? And he has to learn that love is not about what you get, it's about what you give. That love cannot be selfish, it has to be selfless. That the greatest lover is the one who gives the most. And then, once he has matured to be an educated lover, then he looks at her, and instead of going after the hot cheerleader who's really a biatch, you know, and everybody knows it except him, at the end, the cheerleader wants him, and he says no, and he turns to her and he says, I want you. She takes off her baseball cap, her glasses, does this, and she looks like we knew she always did. But he now sees her as the hot fashion model that we knew she was all along. And now he's qualified to love her because, and we see this a lot in Shakespeare comedies, really. It's in As You Like It. It's in Much Ado. So one main way this piece of literature has been viewed until I would say first wave feminism was it's all about the education of a lover, that he needs to be taken to love school. And the very question that Guinevere gives him, what do women want, means that he needs to, for the first time in his life, consider what the world looks like from the point of view of a woman. Because when he rapes the girl, notice we have a parallel here. When Nicholas approaches Allison, she says no, no, but she means yes, yes. Right? But when this knight approaches the peasant girl, she says no, no, but she means no, no. And he rapes her. So he doesn't see her as a woman. He doesn't see her as a person. He sees her as an object, as a thing upon which he wreaks his violence and his lust, as an object. And by the end, he has to get to where he understands what women want. Now, notice the question is, what do women want? The answer isn't just power, because at the end, when he says power, all the women in the court look at each other and they shrug their shoulders and they go, that works. So there may not have been just one answer. Apparently, he just has to answer the question from a woman's perspective. And that theoretically is him being educated in love. Now, of course, the first generation feminists and ones after that basically said, I can't read the story that way because a rapist is rewarded by living happily ever after with the kind of beautiful cheerleader that he wanted to rape to start with. And it's not fair. Secondly, the woman who was raped is irrelevant even to the story. What happens to her and the damage it did to her is irrelevant. She's just 3 lines of a story. Forget about her. She doesn't matter. So it's maybe a little more complicated, but you can't understand the story at all if you don't start with at least the idea of an education of a lover with which you can disagree or agree or modify. Does that all make sense at all? Good. What else? What else makes this a Breton lay? Well, that was really a good discussion. So good. My next question is this. The Wife of Bath's tale. Is it feminist? Is it anti-feminist? Or what? Now, obviously, to some degree, this question I'm asking is anachronistic. Because, obviously, feminism, as we understand it, did not really develop until the late 1700s. But you need to write this name down. Crap, now I'm blanking out on her name. Christine de Pizan. Christine de Pizan. So it's 3 words, Christine, and then D-E. Sometimes the D-E is a small d. And the third name is Pizan, and it's P-I-S-A-N. But sometimes it's spelled P-I-Z-A-N. Now, what is the relevance of Christine de Pizan? Christine de Pizan, Haley, did you write on her or something? I vaguely remember this. No, never mind. Christine de Pizan was a writer roughly contemporary with Chaucer. She's a little younger. She came a little bit after Chaucer. But in Chaucer's era, and she was an ardent feminist. And she wrote 2 books on feminism. One book is I think it's called The Book of the Ladies or something like that.
The City of the Ladies, I think.
City of the Ladies. Thank you. Did you do something on this, Rosie?
I've read the book before, but I haven't written anything.
Okay. She did The City of the Ladies. I think she did another one. Now, what's interesting is the book I've read of her is she did a really excellent book that defines chivalry. But unrelated to that, she wrote a book, The City of the Ladies, and I think she wrote a sequel to that. And she is defending against the very kind of anti-feminist view that is espoused in the book that Janken reads to the Wife of Bath, leveling all these charges against women. And she is advocating what would be an ideal woman of the Middle Ages, and she's awesome. What was your take on it, Rosie? You say you've read it.
I mean, I really like the way that she kind of like symbolized each woman with like a term.
Okay.
and it kind of gave like a deeper meaning to the term itself, and it kind of made you think about it. The only reason I know Troilus and Cressida is because I like read it in comparison to the City of Ladies to kind of see like the feminist perspective of both.
Troilus and Cressida is a perfect courtly romance.
And the Legend of Good Women. Like all three of those were kind of read at the same time. So they kind of merged.
Did you do this for a class or?
I started to do an independent study over the summer for Chaucer. So I started reading that for a research paper,
Awesome.
but yeah, COVID, so that was not happening.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah.
So anyway, so there was actual notions of medieval feminism. It's not completely anachronistic because we have figures roughly contemporary with Chaucer, like Marjorie Kemp, Julian of Norwich, who's awesome. These very strong women who talk about the role of women in the Middle Ages. Christina Pizan. So what do you think? What is going on with the role of women in this story?
I feel like by today's standards, it wouldn't be extremely feminist, but taken in context for the time, it's extremely feminist because the Wife of Bath in her prologue talks about how women shouldn't be treated differently if they have 5 wives because men aren't treated that way. And
Good. So she points out the double standard. Good. What else?
Never says there's anything wrong with it, with getting married again, and that women shouldn't enjoy sex. Like the Bible doesn't say that. So she's very outspoken about getting rid of the double standard, which I feel like is very feminist for the time.
Good. Now, my only proviso is that she adopts a double standard herself. So, for example, she has no problem sleeping around on her husbands, and her first 3 husbands didn't sleep around on her. When her 4th husband does, it drives her insane. She can't understand why he would want any woman other than her, but admits she sleeps around on him. So she adopts that masculine double standard. But at the very least, she's empowered to do that and to comment on the masculine double standard, right? Good. What else?
I feel like it's anti-feminist because she doesn't want equality. She wants sovereignty over everything.
Traditional definition of feminism is equality between the sexes, and there's nothing about her thesis. Her thesis is simply women are hardwired and must have power. So her very thesis violates any standards of feminism. Good point. What else?
I feel like, kind of touching on what Michael said, I feel like she talks about how women should also be able to be like sexually freeing as like the men are. They shouldn't be looked as like they don't have like sexual desire or anything.
Good. Yes, and that is probably a bit scandalous, not just in the Middle Ages to speak out about this, but on a pilgrimage, on the Billy Graham tour of the Holy Land, with how many clergy are there? Male clergy, female clergy. So she is sassy, she is strong.
Doesn't she also misquote the Bible a few times too?
Well, let's just say she's very crafty in her quoting of the Bible. For example, she will quote the first half of a sentence of the Apostle Paul, that the man's body is completely in her command, but she neglects to mention the next half, that the man is in charge of the woman in the marriage. So let's just say her citation of the Bible is creatively selective.
I also feel like, sorry.
No, but you were going to say she misquotes the Bible. What are some examples? You may be right, because she is a peasant and she may not really understand the Bible. What were you going to say? Because she misquotes.
I think she said something about like pleasuring yourself outside of marriage isn't wrong. I could
Oh.
be wrong with how that was worded or how I took it, but that's kind of what
I don't remember that. You may be right about that. Carson,
Yeah.
what were you going to say? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Carson, we're still having a hard time hearing you. Are
Okay.
you, are you there?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
Okay, I'm sorry. It looked like you were going to say something.
No, I did. I was gonna say, I thought that it's kind of interesting because it's almost like she wants equality within like the group of people that she's with because everyone is kind of telling their tales about, and everyone is also like personally themselves trying to experience like grabbing more power. Like people are trying to like move up in ranks, like all kinds of different stuff. And I think that's like obviously shown throughout all of their stories as well. So I feel like you could honestly say like, even though her story's like imperfect and even though like it's not a perfect ideal of feminism, she's like almost herself trying to become like equal like them in the way that she can be that she can like misuse power, I guess. Which is not obviously what the whole point of feminism is and
Mhm.
everything. That's not a perfect idea. I just think that like it is interesting that she's trying to grab power in that way specifically of like portraying the story like that.
Yeah, it's almost as if the lady doth protest too much. You know, it's almost like she pushes so hard that there's maybe something going on here. And yet there's times when she's ridiculously submissive. So, for example, two clergymen interrupt her and they tell her to quit talking about X and talk about Y. She immediately quits talking about X and starts talking about Y. The next one says, quit talking about Y and start talking about Z. She immediately obeys and asks his permission to continue. Those are part of what the medieval people thought of as the weaknesses of women. And she is doing that very thing. So that seems to be somewhat anti-feminist. She makes all kinds of claims about women, which seem anti-feminist, that they're all liars, that they're all gossips, that, I mean, she makes these wild claims about all women. And these are exactly the types of things that in this book of Wicked Wives, they would say is why women are horrible, second-class creatures. When her husband reads to her all this stuff, her complaint is, I hate it when people tell me my vices. She admits she's exactly like the negative medieval stereotype of the wicked woman. She embodies it. And so that's got to be anti-feminist to some degree, right? She is this glorious paradox. You want to get to the heart of her and say, what is going on? Now, one thing I think is interesting is a lot of sophomore students will try to argue that really what she wants is equality between the sexes. Which is why she argues the women should have power so that they'll have more power, and what she wants is equality. Well, I always ask them, where in the text do you get that? And they never can really say. So really what it is, they know that modern feminism is equality. They see her radically not feminist and then radically feminist, and they want to say, let's add all that up, divide by 2, and say that she's a perfect modern feminist. I don't mind that argument or any argument, but I'm just wanting evidence, right? Good arguments from the text. And I don't see a lot of that here. I Does that make sense at all? Sometimes we want to project on an ancient piece of literature whatever our current worldview is as a culture, despite what that ancient text is saying. And this ancient text is a lot more interesting than that. And I have to say, I don't know what's going on, but Chaucer clearly wrote her as someone who is self-conflicted, someone who is doing a number of things at once. And also the partner. The partner and the wife of Bath seem to me to be the most psychologically real and the most self-contradictory. And by the way, those are the two that are by far the most studied of all the Canterbury Pilgrims and all the tales. Sadly, we're out of time. Awesome discussion.